So this webinar is the best practices of managing your companies with objectives, and it applies equally to company executives, CEOs, chief operating officers, vice presidents, and senior vice presidents at all level, but equally so to general managers and middle managers, or any frontline managers, team managers. So, or even employees that are looking to become managers in the near term, I think will benefit from this just as well. So, really quickly about myself, this is a subject I'm pretty passionate about: setting objectives and managing organizations with clear alignment through objectives. I run the company. This is something that I love talking about. In fact, sometimes an hour is not enough. I can go on for days. But I've been an executive at a couple of very successful companies. The concept of alignment, strategic execution, or strategy tying to execution are things that I've spent a lot of my time really applying throughout my career. So I'm going to share some of the best practices with you today at a very high level, in a high level manner that will hopefully be approachable to most. So, just a quick introduction. Probably a lot of you have read Patrick Lencioni. He's one of my favorite business experts and coaches and authors. I've read all of his books. I highly recommend them. You've probably heard of this one or have read this one, The Five Dysfunctions of a Team. But here he says, if you could get all the people in an organization rowing in the same direction, you could dominate any industry in any market against any competition at any time. Very strong words, right? Very strong words. And what he talks about here is basically alignment, right, in an organization. And alignment is obviously from people, right? You don't align things or vacuum, right? You align people because your company's performance is directly a result or a function of the performance of your own people, right? It's people who make the company, and it's alignment and execution of your people at your company. And every company, every CEO, every executive, and every team, really, they want to know is, does everyone clearly know their objectives? Are all the people sort of clearly on the same page with what they have to execute? And of course, are they all clear how they connect or align to top company objectives? Meaning that the objectives that people need to execute on have to directly align to what matters to the company, right? It can't be just in some vacuum that doesn't really make sense or doesn't really matter. And can we measure the progress that people are making objectively and consistently, right? So that we're not really flying by the seat of the pants, as they say, but are actually executing effortlessly and in the same direction, and sort of imagine everybody in a boat putting in the oar in the water all at the same time, so that it's smooth, right? And everybody, the boat is not jerking around; it's actually smoothly moving forward. The problem is there's a statistic at Harvard Business Review that was actually a study that came out from two very famous professors, Professor Kaplan and Norton. They're well known in the world of strategy and execution. They actually invented the concept of the balanced scorecard. And a lot of what we do in strategy today, especially companies that we serve a lot, the mid-market companies, typically companies between 50 to 1,000 employees, they don't actually necessarily use the balanced scorecard themselves, or don't know that they're using it. Let's say, let's at least say that. Unless, of course, maybe you're a 1,000-person company. I could see when you're tracking towards 1,000, you some of your executives may start implementing some of the basic concepts of the balanced scorecard. But these two professors invented the balanced scorecard, which really means that they're deep experts in strategy and connecting strategy to execution. They did this study, and they had, I'm guessing, I forgot the exact number, but probably 1,000 companies that they've studied at Harvard, and they came out with this interesting statistic that 95% of the employees actually don't understand fully the company's objectives. And by the way, when I say goals, objectives, I do use them synonymously, but if you want to get really academic or maybe even say pedantic, you could, of course, distinguish them and discern on the definitions, but let's just keep it simple and use them synonymously. And most employees of the company that don't actually understand the company's objectives or goals or what's actually expected of these very employees to help the company achieve its objectives. And that's a real shame. That's very costly because there was another study done by the Brookings Institute and the Society for Human Resource Management that on your P&L, on your income statement, 70% of every dollar that the company spends is on its people. And 95% of your people don't actually understand your company's goals, unless you're a very small company and you communicate it very clearly all the time. Well, as you can imagine, the 5% is just the executives, just the executive team. And everyone else probably doesn't get the communication of the top corporate objectives or strategy, or they just don't open that PowerPoint or email that was sent to them. Um, it, it becomes like another document that nobody ever opens again, and that's a real problem, right? It's a very costly problem. Gallup did a study not too long ago that employees don't really know what's expected of them. This was just about 2 years ago, actually less than that. They don't really know what's expected of them. How can that be, right? You're probably sitting on this webinar and you're thinking, no way, my team or my company, of course they know what's expected of them. And that's true. To some degree, people know what activities or tasks they're supposed to perform. But objectives are different. We'll actually talk about why objectives are not activities, they're not tasks. And they don't know the company's main objectives and how the employee's objectives tie into that. That's what we talked about on the prior slide. Most of your employees don't. And this actually impacts employees' engagement at work, really kind of this adherence to getting things done effectively, right? So that's a problem. It's a real problem. And it's been studied and quantified. So your organization, like many, focus potentially all of these or most of these challenges, executing your strategy. And by the way, you can't really execute strategy if it's not very clearly communicated in the first place. Sustainable business growth, right? Doesn't matter what company size you are, growing sustainably and effectively and cost effectively, it's hard, right? Being agile in your marketplace, sort of being agile and being able to respond to competition. And that's the next point, the threat of competition and disruption in varying degrees to your own business. Internal alignment, everyone being on the same page, and ultimately ensuring that all the managers at your company, managers are paid, a lot of money, and their job is to manage your human capital, your people. Again, remember the point that your company's performance is directly tied to the performance of your people, right? It's not tied to the performance of your real estate or computers or your company logo, right? You need people to do the job. They're everything, right? And if your managers are not managing your people effectively and efficiently, um, that is extremely costly because let's say they have 7 to 10 people under them on average. Any ineffective manager makes those 7 or 10 people ineffective across the board. There are real stats on that, and it's extremely painful and extremely costly. And it's one of those costs that's not easily measurable and quantifiable on the surface. Excuse me. So companies and teams need clear objectives, and these, the ability to clearly state your company-wide objectives, both top corporate objectives and company-wide, for the different teams, department, business units, that will align everyone and will focus the collective effort of everyone on what really matters to your company, right? And by the way, again, if you're a frontline manager on this webinar, you're not managing, a 50 to 1,000 person company as a CEO or COO. And we have a lot of CEOs and COOs on this webinar. But if you're even a frontline manager or a middle manager, it's the same thing for your own sub company, sub organization, rather, your team, your business unit, your department. It applies equally to you on alignment and focus and what matters. A lot of you who are managers, you've obviously studied Peter Drucker, the Dean of Modern Management. Peter Drucker wrote this book, The Practice of Management, very popular, very well known. And there he talked about MBOs, managing by objectives. MBOs have been used for a lot of different companies, but Andrew Grove at Intel many years ago wrote this book, High Output Management, and he basically took MBOs and made them IMBOs, Intel MBOs, and he added a couple of additional sort of best practices or bells and whistles on them that made them more effective, and he applied those at Intel and called them IMBOs. And interestingly enough, and we'll talk about those extra few things in just a minute, but interestingly enough, Google was introduced to these IMBOs by their investor, John Doerr, who actually just released a book um, on Amazon. Is literally like last week, and a lot of companies wrote about it. I think it's called Measure What Matters. And Google, by the time they started applying these IMBOs that John Doerr, their investor, introduced them to. And John Doerr, by the way, worked with Andy Grove at Intel. That's his claim to fame before he became a venture capitalist. But they were calling it OKRs, objectives and key results. So the terminology over time got transmuted into OKRs. And I think the main reason for them is, Intel MBOs would sound like they only apply to Intel. Google didn't want that. And I think they just realized that this made more sense, and you'll see why in a couple of minutes. But there was this video that Google published. It's like an hour and a half long. It's like, 1 hour and 20 minutes, like 80 minutes long. And over 500,000 executives and general managers and frontline managers have watched that video, right? 500,000 in the past few years. It's actually quite a lot. If you look at all the videos on YouTube, you're probably going to get 500,000 views or more from, I don't know, some short, funny video for, I don't know, the younger generation, young crowd, something funny or some musical video from a popular pop star or something. But to get 500,000 views from executives and managers, a cohort of very, very, very busy professionals. How the heck do you do that? Well, this is a very popular subject matter, and of course, combined with the fact that Google applied it and it worked extremely well. In fact, in this book that John Doerr writes, he basically makes a point that Google wouldn't be Google without having OKRs, without creating this laser focus and alignment and ability to execute strategy in a way that most generic average companies just don't do, right? They don't have the discipline to do it. And that's why they're not Google. And of course, Google had other things working for it, but generally, applying these objectives or OKRs even, and of course we can say simply objectives or goals. That's what really OKRs are. They're not complicated. It's just a nomenclature is just a name, but it's really just goals, right? But using goals and using them as a discipline will make every company far more successful than it will be otherwise, right? It's a fact. It's a measurable, quantifiable data point that setting objectives works. And I'll prove that to you directly from Google in a few slides. I keep promising something cool every few slides, right? But look, let's define OKRs. This is what we're going to talk about a bit here. I mean, really, you can think of them just as objectives, as goals, right? But it's a framework that's the most popular today. It evolved from MBOs, which ultimately became IMBOs, which is what OKRs really are. And Google made them super famous, but they were already famous at Intel, and even Peter Drucker, made MBOs used worldwide by professional managers and executives. And OKRs is defined by this book, Objectives and Key Results, by Paul Niven and Ben Lamore. Both of these individuals are experts in the field, and we're very friendly with both. In fact, Ben Lamore is on our board of advisors, and Paul Niven is a world-renowned expert in strategy and OKRs. And they define that as OKRs are a critical thinking framework and ongoing discipline that seeks to ensure employees work together, focusing their efforts to make measurable contributions that drive the company forward. Okay? It's objectives, right? It's a discipline, like I said earlier, and it ensures everyone is aligned and focused and their progress is measurable. So this is the slide I promised to show you that Google, they have this website called Rework regarding work. It came from this book that I showed you earlier a couple of slides ago that Laszlo Bock, a former senior vice president of people operations at Google, published called Work Rules. Great book, fantastic book actually. It's kind of the recipe of everything Google did to make them aligned, effective, and how they manage their human capital, which is for any CEO or COO, must read. And this website is basically some of the ideas boiled down. And they said, look, studies have shown that committing to a goal can help improve employee performance. Period. Right? And research reveals that setting challenging and specific goals can further enhance employee engagement in attaining those goals. And then Google talks about using OKRs. This is directly from Google, the most data-driven company on planet Earth. Everything there is data, right? Everything. Remember a couple of years ago they were measuring 40 different shades of blue color in their logo to see which one performs better for click-throughs. I mean, they literally measure everything down to colors in their logo. So you can bet that this is right. Um, and look, OKRs are different from old school goals. Even old school's goals like MBOs. Look, they're simple, they're transparent, they require regular checkups and check-ins so that you're not waiting for a whole year. They're quarterly and not just annual, right? There's full alignment and cascading possible. And hey, very importantly, it was used by Google very successfully, and that's something something to consider. Why do successful other companies use OKRs? It drives awareness of your company's overall objectives and strategy, overall goals and strategy. It's clear communication of what really matters to your company. It improves focus for everyone on these things that matter, right? So that you're not flying by the seat of your pants and don't get defocused, right? It's better agility, right? Because there are more frequent cycles. And these cycles, by the way, these check-ins, they don't take hours. They take, you know, a few minutes per week, like 5 minutes. That's it. Whether your company works the full 40-hour week or the full, Silicon Valley, 80, 100-hour week, whatever it is in that spectrum, it'll still take just 5 minutes out of all of those hours to get recalibrated and refocused on what really matters. And that has incredibly valuable, impactful. It is the biggest ROI you can have in that 5 minutes. Really is. Further, it drives alignment across your company. It increases transparency, which is important for accountability, and it improves engagement of your people at your company. It really does. People do want to know clearly what the objectives are and how these people's effort impacts what matters to the company. It's critical. So I don't need to explain this. A lot of great companies use OKRs. They set objectives and they drive results. And here's some more logos for you. And the reason I have 2 slides is because the reality is I need probably 100 slides. I just used 2. But the takeaway is great companies already use this. So let's talk about those best practices. First of all, number one, numero uno, we break down your strategy into a few uh, corporate objectives. Otherwise, nobody's going to read all those. Even if you have a one-page strategic plan, most of your employees are not going to thoroughly read that and understand it and comprehend it. You do that by communicating it through objectives, right? I'm sure those of you who read The Practice of Management by Peter Drucker remember the story of the 3 stonecutters. And basically, the story goes like this: that a traveler goes through town, and once upon a time, right, and finds these stonecutters in the town center, and they're building something. And he comes up to the first stonecutter and goes, "Hey, excuse me, what are you doing?" And this first stonecutter says, "Can't you see what I'm doing? I'm just making a living." So he's just doing his job. He comes up to the second stonecutter and says, "Hi, what are you doing?" And the second gentleman looks at him and says, "Hey, can't you see? I'm just cutting stones." It's like, why do you ask me? I'm just cutting stones. I can't, isn't this obvious? But then he comes up to the third stonecutter and asks him the same question. And the third one looked at him and says, "Well, can't you see? Because I'm building a beautiful cathedral." There's a very different context for each one of those 3. And it's the third one who clearly got the big picture, right? The vision of the strategy of what that stonecutter was trying to accomplish. While the first one was just making a living and getting paid, and he thought that that's all he's doing, and the second one thought he's simply cutting stones. He didn't connect that to the bigger picture. And by the way, as ugly as this sounds, those 95% of employees that we showed you earlier from the Harvard study by professors Kaplan and Norton, those 95% are your first and second stonecutter, right? So what you need to do is translate your strategic priorities into a few clear and focused top organizational objectives, or OKRs. And then these objectives link your strategy directly to everyone's execution, right? So how do you come up with these strategic priorities, or also known as strategic pillars? And this comes, remember I said earlier that we'll sort of come back and revisit a concept, one concept of the many, many, many concepts from the balanced scorecard. And you don't have to think about the balanced scorecard, but think of it as simply strategy. That's really what it is. Well, when you go through a strategic planning process, and I really hope a lot of you do that every year, you go through that process and ultimately come up with strategic pillars or priorities, sort of the pillars um, in this house analogy, if you will. And by the way, this is taken from Strategic Themes at the Balanced Scorecard Institute. And these priorities, you can come up with something like business growth, customer focus, talent and culture, and technology innovation. That's just an example of many. Of course, majority of companies will have some form of business growth and some form of talent and culture of recruiting great talent or managing people effectively, etc. But for sure, business growth or increasing your company's revenue or business will be one of the um, absolutely critical top corporate priorities, pillars, themes, and ultimately objectives. And let's talk about how do you come up with those objectives out of these strategic priorities, which are the ultimate result and culmination of the strategic planning process that you have hopefully every year. Well, first of all, you should have that strategic plan in the first place. Before you go on, creating your strategic top organizational objectives, like the 3, 4, or 5 such objectives that connect directly to the strategic pillars. These corporate goals should not be created in vacuum, right? They must support your drive towards the achievement of your strategic priorities and your ultimate company vision, right? And by the way, your mission, what you are today, and your vision, what you want to be, say in 10 years from now, that's all part of your ultimate strategic planning process and something you'll summarize on one-page strategic plan. By the way, if you want to see what that one-page strategic plan looks like, I'll show you in a couple of minutes. We actually have that screen in our product that you can fill out very easily, and your whole company can see it and access it if you want. And then you decompose these 3 to 5 strategic priorities and pillars into your objectives. And here's how they are related. Your first one, business growth, translated into an objective with starts, it's wordsmithed slightly differently and communicates action with an action verb. Grow the business. The one about customer focus, delight your customers. You know, third one is build your culture. That ties to your strategic theme of or priority of talent and culture. That's really important overarchingly to your company, and so on and so forth. By the way, you're probably wondering how do you measure these 4 at the bottom with the measurable progress bar. That's right out of our own product, the Atiim ATIIM solution that allows you to set up your objectives and key results and tie it to all the people and measure them. I don't want to go into detail of how that all works because this is not a product demo. It's actually a webinar about using objectives. But it is very important that if you're interested in that, we'll let you know later on how to get a sneak peek at how this actually works in a product. We can give you a demo at no cost. Just jump on. I'll show you later. But for now, just know that this really works well. You can create these objectives. You can integrate them with different systems, or people can update them for you, and you have this dashboard, and you can see all this, and it directly ties or is teased out of your strategic priorities. This is the one-page strategic plan that I told you about earlier, the one-page strategy tops. That's what we call it from a marketing positioning perspective, because you really want to be at the top of your game, in the top quartile of your industry, with clearly communicating your strategy, starting with your mission, your vision, your core values, and of course your top corporate priorities that are on that page that allow you to connect those and create your top objectives out of that. And ultimately, remember, not having that strategy and the vision um, is just bad for your company in general, but having that vision without execution itself towards that vision of your company, having a strategy and not executing it, Thomas Edison said, is simply hallucination, which is very true. So um, you can have strategy, but if you don't create objectives out of the strategic priorities and don't then cascade or waterfall or create aligned sub objectives or other objectives in the organization that align up and contribute up, if you don't have any of that, that's not execution because don't have objectives to execute towards, and that is in turn hallucination. According to Thomas Edison. So look, secondly, understand the basics. A lot of people want to jump into setting objectives or especially OKRs, and they're not always clear on the definitions, but it's so simple. Objectives are the headline, the what you want to accomplish, right? It's basically a strategic theme, like the strategic priority with an action verb, worded is with an action verb, and it's the big thing. It's like we talked about. Let me jump back. We talked about here, grow the business, right? That's your objective. And the key results are basically the pieces under the objective that are measurable and say, how will we accomplish that objective? A key result, remember, is a result, right? It's not an activity. It should be measurable. And this is how you think about it. We want to, and then you state the objective, grow the business, right? Or delight our customers. But how are we going to measure it? How are we going to achieve it? And then the first one of growing the business could be something about achieving 100 million in revenue or 10 million in revenue or whatever it is for you. There could be another one, right? These are the results that when you achieve them, you know that you've ultimately achieved the big broad objective you wanted. And by the way, that is how OKRs are slightly different from the MBOs. And MBO is just a one short sentence where it states the grow the business to 100 million with a measurable factor right in the sentence, right? And it's a little bit different because with OKRs you can have multiple key results, right? And you can assign each one to different, you know, executives or teams or people, etc. With MBOs, you can't do that, right? And writing OKRs is very important. The importance of language really matters. It's very important that you wordsmith it correctly. You try to word the objective in a way that's inspirational to your team, right, and should really inspire them. And growing the business and delighting customers is much more inspirational than saying, make our sales hit $30 million. There's a little bit of a stretch there in the language that you want to use to get people excited about what they're going to accomplish, and that's purely psychological factor in managing. But use action verbs and then phrase objectives or OKRs in the language relevant to our targeted group. So if you're creating objectives for marketing, you don't necessarily have to talk about revenue or sales, right? Some marketing groups really focus on that in business to business organizations, to help sales achieve a revenue target. But in B2B, you'll typically give marketing a goal about leads. How many leads they should generate, 1,000 leads this quarter, right? Their language relevant to the target group. Cascading and aligning is really important. It's another thing you must do when you have objectives. You don't just set objectives. You don't do the set and forget, right? So you have top company objectives. You can have divisional, business unit, departmental, team, and individual, right? Some call it cascade. Some people don't like the word cascade because they think it's sort of one directional. That's not really what cascading necessarily implies at all. But a lot of people argue, like, if you say the word cascade, it means it comes directly from the top in a very kind of structured, overly formal, dictatorial way. Hey, this is your objective. But that's not necessarily so. But you can call it waterfall. But that's really semantics. I think the main point is that any team or individual objectives will come from departmental, and departmental will come from the top company objectives, and therefore everything is much more aligned. By the way, we'll talk about alignment, 3 ways to create alignment later on today, in the next what do we got here, 30 minutes. So this is actually a goal alignment chart. We'll come back to it later, but overarchingly, when you create alignment, This is what it looks like. It resembles an organizational chart, an org chart. But an org chart, your typical textbook org chart, is about people, right? It's a managerial, hierarchical structure of your organization. Objectives don't necessarily have to be that way because you could set objectives that are cross functional. I mean, not every, it's not easy to do if you're just using Excel or PowerPoint, because it's harder to track and measure all the contributions that are, based on the progress. But you could create it. For example, in our software, you could create cross-functional alignment that breaks down silos and allows to connect, let's say, marketing to sales, or product to marketing or to sales, whatever it is, right? Or sales and support teams that need to onboard customers and support them afterwards, et cetera, et cetera, or during the process of the sales process, whatever it is. Um, Goal alignment visualization is different slightly from your formal organizational structure. So just keep that in mind, but that's what this is. And then, let's talk about planning and timeline. What are the best practices there? So here's a first one: focus. In high output management, Andy Grove said, we must realize and act on the realization that if we try to focus on everything, we focus on nothing, right? So you got to choose a few objectives, right? And these are the things that are key, right? The concept of key results emphasizes that these are the core, key, crucial things that must get done. If you don't do anything else, these are the few things that absolutely must get done. Look, I mean, you only have so many resources, right? When I sometimes take a train into work. We're located here in Boston, the center of Boston, and I take a train. And sometimes when it's raining, or a lot of people try to get into the and open train doors, but a lot of people start pushing through. But there's only so many people that'll get in at any point in time and be able to pay with their train card, one person at a time, right? You only have so much throughput, right? In other words, you only have so many resources. You only have so many things your team, your company, your business unit can accomplish in any given quarter, in any given year. You can't get everything done, so focus is critical. Don't try to push all those people through the train doors; they won't be able to get in. Um, and the planning process should be ideally as follows. So, don't do too many things. 1 to 3 objectives, the maximum of 5, for your top company objectives, your departmental objectives, individual, whatever it is, it applies equally to all of them. And key results per each objective, 1 to 3. You could have up to 5. You can think of it maximum of 5 for objectives and 5 for key results. But less is more, right? We have a lot of customers that many teams have just like 1 or 2 key objectives and like 1, 2, or 3 key results under each objective, and that's it. And let's get going. The 3 keys to success are really simply this: use discretion, secondly, common sense, and second one is hard, right? There's a famous quote from a French philosopher, Sartre, I believe, where he says that common sense is not so common, right? That's a fact. I'm sure a lot of you are facing that on a daily basis, and I don't mean necessarily at work, it's outside of work too. When you drive sometime and you just want to switch lanes, and uh, people just start, driving faster not to let you in. I'm saying that because that happened to me yesterday. I'm like, what the heck? I mean, we're not going to get anywhere faster, right? Use common sense, right? Avoid an accident. So look, use common sense. And make sure your teams as well, when they apply objectives or write down objectives, you don't need too many. You don't need to try too hard. And then walk before you run, right? Or even crawl before you walk. Just don't try to do too much. Don't try to make it perfect. Just get going. That's really the most important thing. Finally, within the planning and implementation, each objective must be owned by a directly responsible individual, right? That's a DRI is a term used by Steve Jobs. Actually, I think he coined it. So you can't have objectives suspended in thin air, in vacuum, right? There must be a person who's directly responsible for it. So, and listen, if there's no responsibility, there's no accountability. Each objective must have someone who's responsible and accountable. The next best practice is this is the one must do that you must do. It's really important, as Andy Grove said, to set and check in on these objectives frequently. right? You cannot do set and forget. Check in on them frequently. And when I say frequently, I mean literally have quarterly objectives. Don't set objectives every week. That's not an objective. It's almost like a weekly project or accomplishment or task or something. And they're not really monthly. You could have monthly objectives, but you really just want to have four objective time frames per year, right? Because setting them all the time doesn't make sense. It's just it's too quick and too frequent. But if you set them quarterly but check in on them weekly, it's almost having like a weekly objective, but it's really a quarterly one broken down by each week of the quarter, about 12, 13 weeks, right? And it makes much more sense through multiple different studies. So do that frequently. Check in on them for 5 minutes a week. Check in on where you stand versus where you should be. American Psychological Association did this study, and remember, management is psychology, right? Managing people, right? It's not necessarily a science. There is some science to it as a result of such studies, but it's very psychological. And increasing frequency of monitoring or really these check-ins on progress promoted goal attainment, right? Makes sense because if people just said it, they'll forget it. But if they think about it frequently enough, it refocuses your employees. Um, Progress monitoring had larger effects on goal attainment when the outcomes were reported and made public. This is transparency, right? Or physically recorded. So if you're actually recording it, if it's not in just some email, but you record the information, you centralize it, you make it transparent to others, people are much more likely to hit those objectives, right? And if your goal with your company is to hit objectives and not just fly by the seat of your pants, you're certainly going to achieve that by using OKRs and maybe using technology, a software like ours, for example, to record it, to centralize it, to make it easily automated and with notifications and make it transparent. So that these are the key takeaways. There's another one at Deloitte. Burson studies these types of things at Deloitte. It's a group in Deloitte, and they say the more frequently you check in on your goals, the more likely your company is to score in the top quartile of the business. And they did this research in the high impact performance management using goals to focus the 21st century workforce. That was done 4 years ago or 3.5 years ago. And the 7 big benefits of weekly check-ins. I don't want to read all this to you, but we can send you this presentation later, and I'll show you how to get it for free. You can just send us an email with the words "hi," and I'll give you the email address. Literally, hi. Just say hi to us, wave us, and we'll send it to you. But look, it helps you move faster, be more agile. You identify problems and obstacles when you see your goal is not on track, right, or anyone's goal. And when you see all the alignments, you can see how they impact and what the ripple effects are. It's just better for your company, right? To not find out a quarter too late or a month too late that something is not going well. So look, another best practice is run effective team meetings by starting with goals. For example, as a snapshot out of our software is just a random example is that, you can see in a dashboard is the progress, made on our top goals. Hey, team or individual, do you think you're on track overall? Anything you should, any good wins you're proud of in attaining your objectives that you want to share? That's a very important question. There's actually a book written about it by a professor at Harvard Business School, Professor Teresa Amable. What's small, called the progress principle, the power of small wins. Very powerful stuff. If you ask that question, you're going to be farther ahead than most of your competitors. Um, Identify problem areas early, like through having reports that show you goals that are at risk. You can see where are you stuck, what are the bottlenecks, what goals are at risk, how can I help you, as your manager, as a team manager, etc., or individual manager, attain the goals. So another one is goals are not tasks. Luke Gerstner, who ran IBM and turned IBM around, about a decade plus ago, he also ran RJR Nabisco. He's a very well-known and respected executive, and he said, "Never mistake activity with results. Achieving results is very different than just being busy." In fact, who said? There's a quote. It could have been Peter Drucker, who said, anybody can be busy, right? Don't be just busy. Even the ants are busy, right? Like, any insect can be busy, right? There's a busy bee, right? Like, don't be busy. Don't just do activity. Don't just execute tasks. Do things and invest your effort to achieve actual results, right? Being very busy doesn't mean you're going to increase sales, right? Sales reps being busy doesn't mean they're achieving results. These are two different concepts. And objectives are all about results. So a task is something that you do. A project is basically an initiative where you do a bunch of different tasks and activities. But a goal is an actual desired future state. It's an outcome. It's a result that you're going to achieve by executing a lot of different tasks and projects throughout the quarter, and you'll achieve that specific result. Don't confuse goals management, even goals management software for that matter, like us. Atiim is for goals management and performance management. Goals are not to-do lists. These are examples of task lists, to-do lists, calendars where a lot of people throw, to-dos, but those aren't results. They're not measurable results. They're just to-dos. You know, using Trello or Jira or, project, Microsoft Project, those are things that you can track the initiative of. They're not measurable results that you can dashboard, right? Those are ultimately all the things on this page you do in order to ultimately, in the end, achieve the result, which is the goals. And a lot of companies don't clearly set these goals or objectives. They use all these tools, but they just do activities and tasks and projects without realizing they're not stating clear objectives that are tied or tying strategy and execution. Alignment. You got to create alignment with objectives, right? A lot of companies complain that they don't feel they have alignment. There's people are not on the same page, where they're far more on the same page with objectives. Far, far more. You're almost entering nirvana, perfection, right? And you can create that. So there are three levels of alignment. One is the basic or loose alignment. All you do is you state top goals of the company, write down your team goals. Every person, can write down their individual goals with their manager, and you look at them and you stare at them and you juxtapose them. And basically you say, look, makes sense. They correlate. Things are not out of whack, if you will. There's no corner cases here where something doesn't make sense while we're executing it. Everything sort of aligns. That's called loose alignment. It's not really tight alignment at all. There are no real contributions of progress. Second one is alignment through contributions via key results. If you're using OKRs, an objective can be owned by the CEO or the team manager or the group manager, and the key results can be assigned to people underneath, right? And that's really simple. And the third one is a full-blown objective to objective alignment hierarchy. You can only do these number two, number three effectively in software. If you're going to do it simply in Excel or shared documents or Word file or PowerPoint, it's a real pain in the back to manage it. It's not even worth it, right? Just use a PowerPoint. If you want to do the first alignment, which is really kind of not really alignment, it's mostly juxtaposition and sort of directional correlation of things. Just use PowerPoint or some shared document. If you want to get real structured alignment and see contributions, that's number two. Number three, you need software for that. So basic alignment, we talked about it. Where does it come from? So Laszlo Bock in his book, um, work rules, that we talked about was Google's sort of recipe for how they manage Google. He talked about it, a big company with hundreds of thousands of employees. He said, look, goals do improve performance, hands down. Proven data really works. But spending hours cascading and aligning goals up and down the whole organizational hierarchy across the entire company, you don't want to do that. And I totally agree with him. For a big company with tens of thousands of employees, you simply can't do that effectively. It's a waste of time. And that's what he said here. He said we have a market-based approach, which is very kind of high level. This is goals alignment 101 that we talked about. You state the top corporate OKRs and you know your team's objectives and you know your own. You look at them, everything makes sense, and you start executing, right? So it's better than nothing. It's something you can put in a PowerPoint, right? And teams that are grossly out of alignment, it stands out when you look at them because you're like, how are you executing these objectives? They have absolutely nothing that you can bucket them into your team objectives or your corporate, the top few, the top 3 or 4 or 5 OKRs for Google this quarter or this year, right? That's really basic stuff. Very simple soft alignment, mostly for informing everyone about the direction, and anything grossly out of alignment will just simply stand out. That's how it looks like, for example, in our product. You have a screen, You look at top, you look at my own teams, you look at my personal objectives. Everything seems to match up. Great, we move forward. The advanced alignment 201 is key results ownership. When you have an OKR, um, any individual under that, the objective is owned by the CEO or your own manager for your team or your business unit. And the key results can be assigned to you or to any individual on the team. Three people, each one grabs the three key results, and they work together to help, hit the objective and its progress. The objective's progress is a combination, a composite of the progress of the key results. Here's an example. Q2 top corporate objectives. The first top corporate objectives: become a customer-centric company. You can have the CEO own it, or whoever, right? It could be owned by the team executive. Key result one is, we want an NPS score of 10 from existing customer, and you assign it to the sub team manager, the service team, or the customer support team, or customer engagement, whatever it is, right? And the second one is reduce installation or whatever. You assign it to another owner. Very simple stuff, right? No rocket science. So moving on to the next slide is, the advanced alignment 301. True goal hierarchy. That's our own trademark, and what we do in our product. We allow you to assign different objectives and create a hierarchy when one objective can connect to another objective. And that's very advanced stuff, and you can basically visualize it like this. I told you earlier, we'll come back to this visual goal alignment chart. That's what it looks like when you assign objectives to different departments or teams, and they can all be connected, and these progress bars impact the overarching composite progress bar of the objective to which they in turn align to, right? So this is a third most advanced way. And with that, I wanted to finish up the webinar and give a couple of minutes back to your day. I'm going to answer a couple of questions. I see questions here before we get to the free gifts for webinar attendees. There's a question from Janice. She said, "Hi, you mentioned PowerPoint, but I think you meant to say SharePoint." Well, what I was saying is you can put your objectives into PowerPoint, right? And you can just send them out and share them. You can put that PowerPoint in turn on Microsoft SharePoint, I guess, or you can just put it on Dropbox or Box or anywhere else. I would not recommend to use SharePoint itself purely for objectives. It doesn't create progress alignments. We actually spoke to a company a couple of months ago, and they were doing assigning objectives through SharePoint. It just made no sense to us. It didn't really allow for any effective and efficient process where measurability was possible, but they were trying to do it, and they kind of forced the square peg into a round hole. But it didn't seem like it was working very effectively, and so they came to that conclusion as well, and made the right choice and got software to save time and stop wasting people's time on this complexity. Any other questions that I can help with? Any difficult questions about managing with objectives, assigning objectives, tracking them, measuring them, anything? Alignment. Um, I really like hard questions. Anything at all? How about question? Any questions about why KPIs are pretty much like OKRs? Some people always ask, like, how is KPI different from OKRs? Well, key results are really KPIs. Key performance indicators are key results, and KPIs usually are used in the context of retroactive. You look backwards at, where have our sales been, or last quarter sales, what was our key performance indicator? But, start saying that a KPI looking forward looking as an objective. So that's a key performance indicator that we want to hit going forward or in this quarter. That's a key result inside an OKR, because OKRs are objectives that are forward looking. KPIs are usually the same thing. They're metrics, but looking backwards. So just semantics. All right, we have a question here from Erwin. How do you help your teams understand that there's other work they must also do? Well, Erwin, here's the thing. There's a difference between other work they must do and objectives. Objectives are a composite of a lot of work, right? A lot of work. Think of an objective as climbing to the top of Mount Everest. That's an objective. Other work is, creating a base camp, getting fit for climbing Mount Everest, getting the right equipment. These are all many different tasks, work efforts, projects, training, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And climbing itself, and very carefully, so you don't trip and die, right? That's all the other work. But the objective is just one thing: to get to the top of Mount Everest safely, right, and come back down. That's another objective. Uh, so you don't really need to help them understand that there's other work. They understand that there's a ton of work to achieve those big objectives. If you want them to hit an objective of 100 million in sales, what other work do you want them to do? There are a lot of projects, from sales activity to managing your pipeline and forecasting and follow-ups with customers and demoing, whatever it is. This is all that other work. But that's, once you set objectives, you can discuss what the work is required to hit those. I hope that was helpful to you, Erwin. And by the way, if you have more questions, we can talk about this. But by the way, if you want to say, how do you help them figure out that there are many other objectives? Well, you can't. The objectives really should be, by definition, the very few things that truly, absolutely matter, the must do. And if you're going to try to have too many objectives, it's like trying to get too many people to go on that train that I was talking about from my personal experience, squeeze through the door. You can't. There's only so many people and resources. You have only three types of resources: money, people, and time. That's it, right? You only have so much money, right? And you only have so many people you can hire and have as resources, and there's only so much time. You can't have more, right? It's a big, misconception that you can do more. You're just going to dilute the effort, right? You're you know you're just not going to accomplish what you really truly need because you're trying to do too much. Okay, so I overwhelmed on that one, but a topic I'm passionate about. So Gary, what's your experience in the time taken repetitions until the staff level employee fully understand their role? Listen, I think typically what I've seen is a full ramp for any employee is anywhere between 3 to 6 months, right? And I think it's human psychology, but for people to really understand the role, and we can talk about sales ramp or ramp into other parts of the organization. It depends on the complexity of the department. If you're doing something very simple, if all you're doing is some very kind of perfunctory, kind of repetitive task, it'll be much faster, right? But if you're doing complex things, for example, like sales, right, it's more than 3 months. I would argue it's more like 4, 5, or 6 months, right, to get to ramp. But that's, that all depends on, it's circumstantial. Alejandro asks, alignment seems a tricky theme. Of course, alignment is not simple, but alignment 101 of juxtaposing top corporate objectives, your departmental objectives and individual objectives. The first step is having the discipline to actually do it. And by the way, if your employees don't have the discipline to do it, or if your managers do not have the discipline to do it, you don't have an effective company. I'm sorry to make it so blunt, right? But literally, if people are just coming in and doing quote unquote stuff, they're just busy bees, right? It's being like just doing a ton of activities. That's not an organization that's successful. It's not an effective, it's not an efficient organization. That's been shown time and time again, right? If people are not on the same page executing toward what the CEO and the board and the executive team consider to be top organizational priorities, right? Or therefore objectives that tie to the strategic pillars, if people don't have the discipline to put that clarity together and to take the time and thoughtfully ruminate on what matters at a department or corporate or individual level, if you don't have that, the unfortunate thing is you have an inefficient and very much ineffective organization. Again, please forgive me for being so blunt. And Alejandro, this is not targeted at you at all. I'm saying in general to everyone and not really people in this webinar. I'm sure you're not really like that because you're here because you care. But a lot of companies have that problem. So alignment is tricky, but start with alignment 101. And Alejandro, I will also tell you this. If you're interested, we have a lot of content on our website at Atiim. Come by or email us. We can help you, send you some information to read. If you're a customer, we spend a lot of time with our customers, helping them and handhold them and, customize and work with them on setting up OKRs, making it super simple. And our software helps make that process extremely simple too. But you're right, it's tricky. So, and Gary, the final question here is, what's the best formula to shorten the timeline? Shorten the timeline, I'm guessing maybe you're asking back to your question here of understanding the role. Listen, I think great question here. You want to shorten people's timeline. There's no simplest way to do it because people do need the time to learn what they do. But by being clear, by setting clear objectives, like from the beginning, people are no longer sort of disillusioned. By checking in on them frequently, we talked about the frequent check-ins, the must do, right? If you do it once a week, that means the manager is meeting with the employee. Our software actually enables that, right? To have that frequent check-ins with notifications. It automates the process, makes it super simple. But people then stay on the same page with their manager, and it helps them ramp into their role. So it's much faster, right? It's much easier. And these are, these are sort of the tricks of the trade. All right, so moving on, we have about 4 minutes left, so a couple of gifts. So first of all, I want to offer for all the folks out there who feel that this is, tricky, like Alejandro said, I agree. We can give you a free OKR goals management consultation. This is no BS. We will answer your open Q&A about any concept of OKRs, alignment, whatever, give you examples, help you out. We're looking to make friends, shake hands, or virtually speaking, and show you how it works, and we're happy to help out. And email me directly, Zorian at Atiim, with the subject line OKR. So this is not a sales pitch. It's not a sales call. I personally want to get to know the executives who are looking to do this. And we are very passionate about this concept. That's why we've built this company over the past 4 years just on this topic. And lastly, for anyone else, if you want to see a live demo, it's free, 30 to 45 minutes or so. See demo at Atiim with two I's. I is for including individuals, but it's an A team, A players playing their A game, right? The best people out there. You can get a free copy of this presentation if you say hi to us, and we'll sign you up for demo. We'll give you that free goal consultation, send you some free ebooks so you don't have to fill out too many forms, and ultimately give you a live demo showing you alignment, how it works, how to add goals, etc., etc. So with that said, I'll end this presentation. Email us hi to see demo. I hope this was helpful and edifying and informative. And thank you so much for your time today. Appreciate you joining us, and keep an eye for additional webinars and other information from our company. Thanks so much. Have a great day.